Happy New Year's, YouTube. This is Sean from Broadsword Media. What if the Oakland Raiders kept Jon Gruden? Most people who follow the NFL, and many people who have heard what has gone on in the NFL for the 21st century, are well aware that the Oakland Raiders have been one of the worst franchises throughout the 21st century. From 2003 to the present, they have been one of the worst teams. There's only been 3 years where they actually did not have a losing record during that span. However, I tell you, this downward spiral started before 2003. It just wasn't immediate until 2003. During the beginning of this new millennium, the Raiders were actually one of the most dominant franchises. In the year 2000, under head coach Jon Gruden, they went 12-4, clinching a first-round bye, and they went all the way to the AFC Championship. However, they end up losing to the Baltimore Ravens at home, which was the team that ended up actually dominating the Giants in the Super Bowl. So you could probably forgive them for that loss. In 2001, once again under Jon Gruden, they won their division again, this time at 10-6. In the divisional round, they traveled to Foxborough to take on the New England Patriots. This was Tom Brady's first year as a starting quarterback, by the way. That's how long ago it was. And Rich Gannon was considered one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at that time. And Jerry Rice, despite the 49ers letting him go, was still a very solid receiver for the Raiders that year. On defense, they had Charles Woodson, who was young and still in his prime at that time as well. That snow-filled game is well known as the Tuck Rule game because of one really weird rule that actually doesn't exist anymore, but did exist at the time and is rarely ever called the Tuck Rule. Now, I'm not going to explain the details, just it looked like the Raiders defense forced Tom Brady to fumble the ball, and then the Raiders recovered when they had the lead late in the game. But it ended up being called an incomplete pass, and then Tom Brady made some great passes right after and tied the game, and then Adam Vinatieri kicked the game-winning field goal in overtime. Patriots went on to beat the Steelers in the AFC Championship with Drew Bledsoe because Tom Brady was injured. Then they won the Super Bowl with Tom Brady back against the greatest show on turf St. Louis Rams in a very close and epic Super Bowl, giving the Patriots their first Super Bowl in franchise history. I'm going to go off subject a little bit because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers mix into this theory at the beginning. The Buccaneers head coach Tony Dungy put together a very dominant defense for Tampa. However, their offense still needed improvement. The Bucs lost their patience because they were always losing in the playoffs, typically not even advancing past the wild card round, except maybe once. They fired him. They made a recruitment effort to actually try to get Bill Parcells. I don't know anything else about this recruitment effort. I don't know if he declined or if they just decided not to. I think more than likely he probably just declined the offer. Eventually, the Buccaneers got really desperate, and they wanted to get Jon Gruden as their head coach. However, Jon Gruden was under contract with the Oakland Raiders, so they couldn't just sign him. So the Buccaneers offered a trade to Al Davis. It was a huge deal. They gave up so much to get him. The Bucs traded their 2002 and 2003 first-round draft picks and their 2002 and 2004 second-round draft picks, as well as paying $8 million in cash to the Oakland Raiders to get Jon Gruden. The Bucs wanted him bad. Big mistake by Al Davis for accepting that offer. Davis decided to promote offensive coordinator Bill Callahan to the head coaching job. Callahan clearly was no Jon Gruden. He did fairly well as head coach of Nebraska in college football, but in the NFL, The Raiders still had that powerful offensive core, though. So in 2002, they went 11-5, which that season was good enough to clinch home field advantage in the AFC. They went all the way to the Super Bowl. However, they faced off against the Buccaneers, who had their former coach Jon Gruden leading the charge. He knew everything about the Oakland Raiders playbook. He even practiced with the Bucs, doing exactly what he taught Rich Gannon to do. So it was really unfair because the Bucs already knew what plays the Raiders would call before they called them. And they knew what Rich Gannon would do. And he had one of the worst games of his career. It's amazing the Raiders even scored any points. The Bucs dominated. One of the most hyped Super Bowls and ended up being one of the most one-sided Super Bowls ever, as the Buccaneers dominated the Raiders 48-21. After that, the Raiders have been pretty terrible for the most part and have gone through many head coaches, many starting quarterbacks. They're looking to improve now, although they were kind of a letdown in 2017, let's be honest. So now my question is this. What if the Oakland Raiders actually kept Jon Gruden? Would they have done better? Would they have still had terrible seasons ahead of them anyways? Would there be a huge domino effect of just drastic change throughout the whole league? Who knows? But there are some obvious things I think would happen. Now, I'm pretty certain the Buccaneers would not have won the Super Bowl without Jon Gruden in 2002. But I'm telling you this, there's no guarantee that the Raiders would remain a powerhouse even if they won the Super Bowl in 2002 with Gruden there, or even without him. Because the team had a lot of old stars. Players who were going to retire in just a few years who were their top star players anyway. And Jon Gruden actually had a lot of losing seasons with the Buccaneers. Ironically, the very last game Jon Gruden had coached for the Bucs was in 2008 in a final home game against the Oakland Raiders, his former team, and the Raiders actually beat him, and that loss actually eliminated the Buccaneers from even going to the playoffs, dropping him to 9-7. And he got fired after that. First he gets revenge by beating his old team in a Super Bowl, then the Raiders get revenge by giving him the loss that cost his job in Tampa. Whoa. Now, I'm not going to really get into the head coaching recruitment efforts by the Buccaneers. I also want to get into what happens with the Raiders here. And for this video, I'm just going to focus on 2002. In part 2, I will talk about what I think might happen after 2002. To make this two-part video simpler, the Bucs still fire Tony Dungy, and the Colts still hire him in 2002. And as for who the Bucs gives their head coach, I don't know. Maybe they promote from within, because I want to make it easier by saying Bill Parcells declines and gets hired by the Cowboys in 2003. In 2002, for the Oakland Raiders, in terms of the regular season, it'll be pretty similar. However, I think they'll be a little bit better. I mean, they clinched home field advantage at 11-5, so I think this time they'll clinch home field advantage at 13-3. How they do that? They'll win their home game against the 49ers, and they'll win their home game against the Chargers, making them a perfect 8-0 at home and 5-3 on the road. The playoffs would be pretty much identical to the real-life playoffs in the AFC, but the NFC would be drastically different because the Buccaneers would not be as good without either Dungy or especially Gruden. I'm going to go on and say that Tony Dungy was a better head coach than Jon Gruden, but Jon Gruden was the one who got them the Super Bowl, and I do believe Tony Dungy would not have gotten them there. He did get the Colts the Super Bowl, though, and his every season coaching the Colts was a very solid winning season, although he did have Peyton Manning as his quarterback, so the NFC playoffs would be very different. The Bucs would still make the playoffs because of how amazing that defense is. But with an inferior coach, their offense would still be bad, and their defense might actually be even a little worse too. They dropped to 9-7 by losing to the Browns, who actually were a playoff team that year. They lose to the Falcons on the road, which would give the Falcons the NFC South at 10-5-1. And they would lose the Packers, which would move the Packers from the number 3 seed at 12-4 to having home field advantage at 13-3. So in the NFC wildcard round, the Falcons, who would be the number 3 seed instead of the number 6 seed, would be hosting the Bucs, who would be the number 6 seed instead of the number 2 seed. And the Falcons would actually beat the Bucs in the wildcard round. The other wildcard matchup would be the same, the 4th seed 49ers and the 5th seed Giants. And the 49ers would still have that amazing comeback, amazing game against the Giants and still beat them. None of that would change there. In the divisional round, the Falcons would go against the Eagles just like they did in real life, and just like in real life, the Eagles would beat them. The Packers, who actually lost in the wildcard round at home against the Falcons, would be hosting the 49ers in the divisional round. And I believe, because the Packers could not beat the Falcons in the wildcard round, I actually believe the 49ers can head in there and beat them as well. And that's what they do in a very close, competitive game. Jeff Garcia probably having one of the best games of his career. Tio having one of his best games he's ever had. And Brett Favre making it ever so competitive. So the NFC Championship, the Eagles would be at home just like they were against the Bucks in real life, but this time they'd be at home as number 2 seed against the 4th seeded 49ers. And I think the outcome would be very different than when they faced the Bucks. The Buccaneers defense beat them pretty easily. But the 49ers, their defense is not nearly as good as the Bucks defense. And the Eagles would be well and ready to beat them. The Super Bowl would end up being a rematch of the 1980 Super Bowl between the Raiders and the Eagles. There would be a lot of hype in the Super Bowl. Raiders and Eagles, 2 teams that had faced way back in 1980, now face off again in 2002, completely different teams. The Eagles have a very good Donovan McNabb as their quarterback, while the Raiders have the season passing yards leader in Rich Gannon as their quarterback. They'd have legendary Jerry Rice and Tim Brown as their receivers. The Eagles actually have a very strong defense as well, not as powerful as the Bucks defense. Raiders defense back then was also quite good as well. So this would be a pretty hyped and epic matchup. It wouldn't be nearly as hyped as the real life Super Bowl between the Raiders and Bucks, since it was, you know, 2 teams of pirates against each other and a coach going against his former team in the Super Bowl. But it would be a much closer Super Bowl. Andy Reid is a solid head coach and probably the best head coach the Eagles ever had. Although if the Eagles keep playing like they are under Doug Peterson, maybe he might actually take that role. This would be a much closer game, but I do believe the Oakland Raiders would win the Super Bowl with if they kept Jon Gruden as their coach. They'd go against the Eagles in an epic clash. It would be a fairly close game, but I do believe the Raiders would win by double digits. Probably by like 2 scores. Maybe they'd beat them by 10 points, 14, maybe beat them by 17 points. So it wouldn't be the most one-sided game, but it would be a fairly competitive game that doesn't quite go down the wire, but would be much more watchable than the real-life Super Bowl that happened between the Raiders and Bucks. That's what I think would happen if the Oakland Raiders kept Jon Gruden. They would be even better than they were in 2002. They would go to the Super Bowl. They'd go against the Eagles instead of the Buccaneers, and they'd win the Super Bowl. The Raiders would be 4-time Super Bowl champions. Unfortunately for the Bucks, they'd have no Super Bowl appearances, and if the Eagles continue to dominate the early part of the millennium and go back to the Super Bowl again in 2004 to face the Patriots, the Eagles would unfortunately be 0-3 in the Super Bowl. So that's what I think would happen. I will talk more about what will happen after that Super Bowl victory. Will the Raiders actually be a lot better under Jon Gruden than they were without him? Most likely they would be, especially after winning their 4th Super Bowl title. However, there were other reasons besides trading Jon Gruden to the Bucks that really hurt the team. For example, I named off that their best star players are getting older, and only a few years later they retired. All of them did. With Jon Gruden still there, would they fare any better? Find out in part 2. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first What If series video. I know I meant to do this way back in 2015, but I finally did it. Now is a better time than ever to finally upload this video. If you want to see more of these What If videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to click that bell icon. That bell icon will let you know every single time I upload a new video. Stay tuned, as I plan to do more What If videos, more top 10s, and, well, whatever actually helps this channel gain some ground. Thank you so much for watching.